Donovan's journey to becoming America's spymaster was shaped by combat experience, legal brilliance, and an unshakable belief in the necessity of centralized intelligence. His story unfolds not through a single dramatic mission, but through the construction of an entire apparatus for secret warfare, culminating in one of the most complex and consequential intelligence operations of the European theater. This operation would test every capability Donovan had built, involve hundreds of operatives behind enemy lines, and directly influence the outcome of major military campaigns. William Joseph Donovan is born on January 1, 1883, in Buffalo, New York, to Irish Catholic immigrant parents. He grows up in a working-class neighborhood where physical toughness and intellectual ambition are equally valued. His childhood nickname, Wild Bill, emerges not from recklessness, but from his fierce competitiveness in sports and street fights, combined with an intensity that marks him throughout his life. When the United States enters World War I, 1997, Donovan immediately volunteers for military service, despite being 34 years old and exempt from conscription. He receives a commission as a major and is assigned to the 69th Infantry Regiment, later redesignated the 165th Infantry Regiment of the 42nd Rainbow Division. This decision marks the first major turning point in his life, transforming a successful lawyer into a combat leader. Donovan's service in World War I becomes legendary. He leads his battalion through some of the bloodiest engagements of the American Expeditionary Forces, including the Meuse-Argonne Offensive. During one action near Landres et Saint-Georges in October 1918, Donovan continues commanding his unit despite being severely wounded in the leg, refusing evacuation until the position is secured. For this action, he receives the Medal of Honor. He also earns the Distinguished Service Cross, the Distinguished Service Medal, and numerous foreign decorations, including France's Croix de Guerre. The experience of trench warfare teaches Donovan critical lessons about courage, leadership, and the importance of information. He observes how military intelligence, though primitive by later standards, can mean the difference between success and catastrophic failure. These observations remain with him as he returns to civilian life in 1919, resuming his legal career but maintaining connections to military and government circles. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, Donovan builds one of the most prominent law practices in New York, representing major corporations and arguing significant cases. However, he never abandons his interest in military affairs and international relations. He travels extensively throughout Europe and Asia, observing political developments with growing concern. By the mid-1930s, Donovan recognizes the rising threats from Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan before many American policymakers take them seriously. In 1940, with war engulfing Europe, President Franklin Roosevelt and his administration face a critical problem. The United States possesses no centralized intelligence organization. Military intelligence services are fragmented, competitive, and focused primarily on tactical information. The Federal Bureau of Investigation handles domestic security but lacks authority for foreign operations. Britain's intelligence services are sophisticated and extensive, but America has nothing comparable. Roosevelt understands that modern warfare requires more than military force. It demands comprehensive intelligence gathering, covert operations, and unconventional warfare capabilities. Roosevelt's advisors recommend William Donovan for a fact-finding mission to Britain in July 1940. Donovan's reputation as a war hero, his international experience, and his legal acumen make him uniquely qualified. During this visit, British intelligence services, desperate for American support, provide Donovan with unprecedented access to their operations. He observes the Special Operations Executive's training facilities, learns about signals intelligence work at Bletchley Park, and studies techniques for sabotage, propaganda, and organizing resistance movements. Donovan returns to Washington convinced that the United States must immediately develop similar capabilities. He presents Roosevelt with a detailed plan for a centralized intelligence organization that would coordinate information from all sources, conduct espionage operations, carry out sabotage and guerrilla warfare, and support resistance movements in occupied territories. The concept is revolutionary for American government, which has traditionally avoided permanent intelligence establishments in peacetime. On July 11, 1941, 5 months before Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt appoints Donovan as Coordinator of Information, essentially creating the position for him. The organization begins modestly, with a small staff and limited budget, but Donovan immediately begins recruiting talent from universities, law firms, corporations, and the military. He seeks individuals with language skills, cultural knowledge, analytical abilities, and the courage for dangerous assignments. The attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 validates Donovan's warnings and accelerates the expansion of his organization. In June 1942, Roosevelt formally establishes the Office of Strategic Services with Donovan as its director, now holding the rank of Major General. The OSS receives a broad mandate encompassing espionage, analysis, counterintelligence, and special operations. Donovan structures the organization into multiple branches, each with specific responsibilities. Research and analysis employs scholars to study enemy capabilities and vulnerabilities. Secret intelligence conducts espionage operations. Special operations organizes sabotage and guerrilla warfare. Morale operations conducts psychological warfare and propaganda. Building an intelligence service from nothing presents enormous challenges. The military services view the OSS with suspicion, protective of their own intelligence capabilities. The FI resents any encroachment on its jurisdiction. Many government officials distrust the whole concept of centralized intelligence as un-American. Donovan must constantly justify his organization's existence while simultaneously conducting operations across multiple theaters of war. Despite these obstacles, the OSS expands rapidly. By 1943, it employs thousands of personnel stationed around the world. Training facilities in Maryland and Virginia teach espionage tradecraft, sabotage techniques, close quarters combat, and parachute operations. Donovan insists on rigorous preparation, understanding that poorly trained operatives endanger not only themselves, but entire networks. The OSS develops relationships with Allied intelligence services, particularly Britain's Special Operations Executive and Secret Intelligence Service, learning from their experience while contributing American resources and personnel. Throughout 1942 and 1943, OSS operations gradually prove their value. Agents parachute into occupied France, establishing contact with resistance groups and gathering intelligence on German defenses. Teams operate in North Africa and Italy, providing tactical information for Allied campaigns. Analysts in Washington produce detailed studies of enemy industrial capacity, transportation networks, and military organization. Slowly, skeptics within the military and government begin acknowledging the OSS's contributions. However, Donovan envisions something far more ambitious than scattered operations and analytical reports. As Allied forces prepare for the invasion of France, he develops plans for the most comprehensive intelligence operation yet attempted, one that would demonstrate the full potential of coordinated secret warfare. This operation, eventually known as Operation Jedburgh, would represent the culmination of everything Donovan had built since 1941. By early 1944, Allied planners are finalizing details for Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy scheduled for June. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force recognizes that success depends not only on the assault itself, but on preventing German reinforcements from reaching the invasion beaches. Resistance movements throughout occupied France possess the capability to disrupt German communications and transportation, but they need coordination, supplies, and technical expertise. Donovan proposes an audacious solution. The OSS, in cooperation with British Special Operations Executive and the Free French Intelligence Services, would insert three-man teams throughout France to organize and direct resistance activities in support of the invasion. Each team would consist of one American or British officer, one French officer, and one radio operator. They would parachute into occupied territory, make contact with local resistance groups, coordinate sabotage operations, and provide intelligence directly to Allied commanders. The concept is tactically sound, but operationally dangerous. The teams would operate hundreds of miles behind enemy lines with limited support, completely dependent on the resistance networks they were sent to organize. If captured, they could expect torture and execution. The Germans had spent 4 years attempting to destroy resistance movements, infiltrating networks and conducting brutal reprisals. Survival rates for agents operating in occupied France were already distressingly low. Planning for what becomes Operation Jedburgh begins in earnest in late 1943. The operation's name comes from a Scottish town near where some of the training occurred, chosen arbitrarily but eventually becoming synonymous with the entire effort. Donovan oversees the selection and training process personally, understanding that the operation's success depends entirely on the quality of personnel involved. Volunteers undergo intensive preparation at facilities in England and Scotland. They learn advanced parachute techniques for nighttime jumps into unmarked drop zones. They study German military organization, French geography, and resistance movement structure. They receive training in demolitions, focusing on railroad sabotage and communications disruption. Most critically, they learn radio operations, as maintaining contact with headquarters in England would be essential for coordinating activities. The French officers joining the teams present unique challenges. Many are drawn from General Charles de Gaulle's Free French forces, motivated by fierce patriotism, but sometimes lacking the technical skills required. Others come from intelligence services, experienced but potentially compromised by previous operations. The Americans and British must build trust quickly with their French partners, as mutual confidence could mean the difference between success and disaster. By May 1944, nearly 100 Jedburgh teams have completed training and await deployment. Each team receives specific assigned areas in France, detailed intelligence about local resistance groups, codes for communication, and operational objectives tied to the invasion plan. The teams carry false identification papers, substantial amounts of French currency, weapons, and radio equipment. They also carry lethal pills, a grim acknowledgement of what capture would mean. Operation Overlord launches on June 6, 1944. As Allied forces storm the Normandy beaches, the first Jedburgh teams parachute into France under cover of darkness. The drops are chaotic. Teams miss their designated zones by miles. Equipment containers scatter across the countryside, and some teams are immediately forced to evade German patrols. Several teams lose contact with headquarters for days, operating independently while German security forces hunt for them. Despite initial difficulties, the Jedburgh bows. Teams begin achieving their objectives. In Brittany, teams link up with resistance fighters and coordinate attacks on railroad lines leading to Normandy. They target bridges, tunnels, and track junctions, forcing German units to take longer, more vulnerable routes. In central France, teams organize ambushes against German convoys attempting to reinforce the Normandy front. They mine roads, destroy fuel depots, and cut telephone lines, creating confusion and delays. The intelligence provided by Jedburgh teams proves equally valuable. Their radio reports give Allied commanders near real-time information about German troop movements, defensive positions, and reinforcement schedules. This intelligence allows Allied aircraft to strike German columns before they reach the battlefield, significantly reducing pressure on forces advancing from the beaches. However, the operation extracts a terrible cost. Several teams are ambushed shortly after landing, their members killed or captured. The Germans respond to resistance activities with characteristic brutality, conducting mass reprisals against civilian populations suspected of supporting the teams. Entire villages are destroyed, hundreds of civilians executed. The Jedburgh operatives witness these atrocities directly, understanding that their presence brings death to those who shelter them. One team operating in the Vosges Mountains exemplifies both the operation's successes and its tragedies. After parachuting into their assigned area in mid-June, the team makes contact with a well-organized resistance group. Over the following weeks, they coordinate numerous sabotage operations, destroying several bridges and derailing multiple German trains. Their intelligence reports help Allied aircraft destroy an armored column attempting to reach Normandy. In August, German security forces surround the resistance camp where the team is operating. A brutal firefight erupts. The team's radio operator is killed immediately, cutting off communication with headquarters. The American officer is captured, tortured for information about other operations, and executed. Only the French officer escapes, eventually making his way back to Allied lines weeks later. His debriefing report describes the operation's tactical success, but also the human cost that made it possible. As Allied forces break out from Normandy and advance across France in late summer 1944, additional Jedburgh teams deploy ahead of the front lines. They continue coordinating resistance activities, now focusing on preventing German forces from establishing defensive positions and protecting critical infrastructure from German demolition. The teams operating in southern France support Operation Dragoon, the Allied invasion of the Mediterranean coast, performing the same disruptive functions that proved so effective in Normandy. By autumn 1944, with most of France liberated, the Jedburgh teams begin returning to Allied control. Of the 93 teams eventually deployed, 13 members are killed in action and several others captured. Many more are wounded or suffer from exhaustion, malnutrition, and the psychological strain of months behind enemy lines. The survivors bring with them detailed intelligence about resistance operations, German security measures, and lessons about unconventional warfare. The operational impact of the Jedburgh mission is substantial but difficult to quantify precisely. Allied commanders credit the teams with significantly delaying German reinforcements to Normandy, though exact figures remain disputed. Conservative estimates suggest the coordinated resistance activities organized by the teams delayed 2 German divisions from reaching the invasion front by at least 2 weeks. Some historians argue the delays were even more significant, possibly affecting the outcome of critical battles in the weeks following D-Day. Beyond immediate tactical results, Operation Jedburgh demonstrates the viability of coordinated unconventional warfare on a strategic scale. Donovan proves that properly trained, adequately supported special operations teams can achieve effects far beyond their small numbers. The operation establishes principles and techniques that influence special operations doctrine for decades afterward. from Vietnam to modern counterinsurgency campaigns. For Donovan personally, Jedburgh represents the vindication of his vision for centralized intelligence and special operations. Despite skepticism and bureaucratic resistance, he has built an organization capable of conducting complex operations across an entire theater of war. The OSS proves it can recruit and train personnel, maintain secure communications over vast distances, coordinate with resistance movements, and provide actionable intelligence to military commanders. However, success brings new challenges. As the war progresses, military commanders increasingly request OSS support for operations in the Pacific Southeast, Asia, and preparations for the invasion of Japan. Donovan must expand his organization while maintaining operational security and quality standards. The rapid growth strains resources and creates opportunities for enemy penetration. German and Japanese intelligence services actively seek to infiltrate OSS networks, occasionally succeeding despite Donovan's emphasis on counterintelligence. The OSS continues operations through the final year of the war. Teams parachute into Germany itself, attempting to organize resistance among slave laborers and prisoners of war, though these operations achieve limited success. In Asia, the OSS works closely with resistance movements in Burma, Thailand, and China, conducting operations against Japanese forces and gathering intelligence on enemy dispositions. Donovan travels constantly, visiting OSS stations around the world, coordinating with allied intelligence services, and advocating for his organization's continued expansion. Germany's surrender in May 1945 marks a transition point for the OSS. With the European war concluded, attention shifts to the Pacific and the anticipated invasion of Japan. Donovan develops plans for massive unconventional warfare campaigns in occupied Asia, including operations to support Chinese Communist forces against Japanese armies in Manchuria. However, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 end the war before these operations can be executed. The sudden end of the war creates an immediate question about the OSS's future. With no enemy to fight, many assume the organization will be dissolved as a temporary wartime measure. The military services, still resentful of the OSS's independence and influence, advocate loudly for its elimination. President Harry Truman, who succeeded Roosevelt after his death in April 1945, receives conflicting advice about whether America needs a permanent intelligence organization. Donovan argues passionately that the coming peace will require comprehensive intelligence capabilities even more than the war did. He envisions the OSS evolving into a permanent agency responsible for monitoring global threats, conducting espionage operations, analyzing foreign developments, and preparing for future conflicts. He submits detailed proposals to Truman outlining how the organization should be structured and what authorities it would need. However, Donovan's vision faces powerful opposition. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, led by J. Edgar Hoover, views any permanent intelligence agency as a threat to its jurisdiction. The military services want intelligence functions returned to their control. Many in Congress oppose creating what they characterize as an American Gestapo. The debate over America's intelligence future becomes increasingly political and personal. On September 20, 1945, President Truman issues an executive order abolishing the Office of Strategic Services effective October 1st. The order distributes OSS functions to the State Department and War Department, effectively dismantling everything Donovan had built over 4 years. Donovan, deeply disappointed, returns to private law practice, believing his vision for centralized intelligence has been rejected permanently. The dissolution proves short-lived. Within months, Truman and his advisors recognized that fragmenting intelligence capabilities was a mistake. The emerging tensions with the Soviet Union, the challenges of occupation in Germany and Japan, and the complexities of post-war international relations demand sophisticated intelligence collection and analysis. In January 1946, Truman establishes the Central Intelligence Group, drawing heavily on former OSS personnel and organizational structures. In 1947, the National Security Act formally creates the Central Intelligence Agency, institutionalizing Donovan's vision, even though he plays no role in the new organization. Donovan never serves in the CIA he helped create. He returns to his law practice but maintains connections to intelligence and national security circles. He serves as ambassador to Thailand from 1953 to 1954, his final government position. Throughout his later years, he remains convinced that America's security depends on maintaining strong intelligence capabilities, often warning about Soviet espionage and the need for vigilance. William Donovan dies on February 8, 1959, at the age of 76. His passing receives significant public attention, with obituaries emphasizing his World War I heroism and wartime leadership of the OSS. However, the full extent of his contributions remains classified, and the general public understands little about the organization he built or the operations it conducted. Only gradually, as documents are declassified over subsequent decades, does Donovan's true legacy become apparent. Operation Jedburgh, though only one of many OSS operations, exemplifies Donovan's approach to intelligence and unconventional warfare. The operation demonstrated that strategic effects could be achieved through careful planning, rigorous training, coordination with local forces, and acceptance of significant risks. The principles established during Jedburgh influenced American special operations doctrine throughout the Cold War and beyond. Modern analysts examining Donovan's career identify several factors that enabled his remarkable achievements. First, he possessed the perfect combination of combat experience, intellectual capability, and institutional vision. Unlike intelligence professionals who had never faced combat, Donovan understood the practical requirements of military operations. Unlike military officers focused solely on conventional warfare, he grasped the strategic value of information and covert action. Second, Donovan benefited from extraordinary circumstances. The crisis of World War II created opportunities for institutional innovation that would have been impossible in peacetime. Roosevelt's support provided the political protection necessary to overcome bureaucratic resistance. The alliance with Britain offered access to intelligence techniques and expertise that would have taken years to develop independently. Third, Donovan's recruitment and personnel policies proved critical. Rather than building the OS entirely from military or government personnel, he drew talent from universities, law firms, and corporations. This approach brought diverse expertise and creative thinking to intelligence problems. The recruitment of scholars for research and analysis created the foundation for modern intelligence analysis. The selection of multilingual, culturally sophisticated individuals for operations behind enemy lines increased survival rates and operational effectiveness. Fourth, Donovan insisted on rigorous training and operational security, despite the pressures of wartime urgency. Many OSS operations succeeded because personnel were thoroughly prepared for the challenges they faced. Conversely, several failures can be traced to inadequate preparation or security breaches. Donovan's emphasis on tradecraft and counterintelligence, though never perfect, helped protect operations from enemy penetration. Finally, Donovan understood the importance of demonstrating value to skeptical military commanders and policymakers. Operations like Jedburgh were designed not only to achieve tactical objectives, but also to prove the concept of centralized intelligence and special operations. By delivering actionable intelligence and visible results, the OSS B can earn the respect and support it needed to expand and survive. Donovan's legacy extends far beyond his wartime service. The CIA, though created after his departure, embodied many of his organizational principles and operational approaches. The emphasis on both collection and analysis, the integration of human intelligence with technical sources, the capability for covert operations, and the coordination of information from multiple sources all reflect Donovan's vision. Every CIA director since 1947 has led an organization fundamentally shaped by what Donovan built between 1941 and 1945. Operation Jedburgh specifically influenced the development of Army Special Forces, established in 1952. The concept of small, highly trained teams working with indigenous forces behind enemy lines became central to Special Forces doctrine. The lessons learned in occupied France about resistance organization, unconventional warfare, and civil-military relations informed operations in Korea, Vietnam, and subsequent conflicts. Modern Special Operations Forces continue to study Jedburgh as a model for effective unconventional warfare. Historians examining World War II intelligence operations increasingly recognize Donovan's contributions as comparable to those of military commanders whose names are far more famous. While Eisenhower, Patton, and MacArthur commanded armies, Donovan built the invisible infrastructure of intelligence and covert operations that enabled those armies to fight effectively. His achievement was less visible, but equally essential to Allied victory. William Donovan's story ultimately represents the transformation of American national security policy. Before World War II, the United States relied on minimal intelligence capabilities, viewing permanent espionage organizations as contrary to democratic values. Donovan demonstrated that democracy and effective intelligence are not incompatible, that transparency in governance can coexist with necessary secrecy in operations, and that intelligence serves rather than threatens freedom. His life bridges two eras of American power. The courage he demonstrated in World War I belonged to an older tradition of personal heroism and battlefield leadership. The vision he pursued in World War II anticipated the complexities of modern national security, where information and covert capabilities matter as much as conventional military force. By combining these qualities, Donovan became the architect of American intelligence, building institutions that outlasted him and operations that changed history. Operation Jedburgh stands as his masterpiece, a demonstration that intelligence could be strategic, that special operations could influence campaign outcomes, and that properly organized unconventional warfare could achieve effects far beyond what small numbers might suggest. The operation's success validated years of planning and justified the creation of capabilities that skeptics had dismissed as wasteful or dangerous. In examining William Donovan's career, we gain insight into how institutions are created under crisis conditions, how vision and persistence can overcome bureaucratic resistance, and how one individual's leadership can fundamentally alter national capabilities. His legacy endures not in monuments or public celebrations, but in the organizations that continue his work, the operations that follow his principles, and the recognition that modern security requires both strength and secrets, both military power and intelligence capability.